Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and of course, Mike Simmons, the founder of Catalyst Sale, is here with us. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody. And I think the second best mini golf putter on this podcast is here, right?
And the second best and the first best.
Jody, why am I second best?
Well, I hadn't even said that. You just pointed it out. But Mike Simmons and I actually finally, after years of working together and talking smack back and forth about miniature golf, we finally had our showdown. Just a week and a half ago in Orlando, right before everything got shut down, Mike and I played at Disney World.
Well, I don't know that I played.
You were there and you had a putter in your hand.
I was there. I had a putter in my hand, and I definitely had a good walk spoiled.
Well, I know we're going to talk about decision-making frameworks in this episode, and so I'm kind of curious, Mike, why you would talk smack for years when you did not have the ability to back it up.
I had very high expectations of myself and my capability. And you know what, Jody, I just was not ready to perform. I had all the expectations that I would perform. And in the first 3 holes, I took a 6, which was the maximum number on the course that you could take. And the wheels just fell off from there. So I think I was down 9 strokes after 3 holes. Is that fair?
So here's what I found interesting. Before we even putted on the very first hole, Mike tells me our family plays it out. There is no hole limit until Mike gets a 6. And then he said, well, 6 is the limit. So I felt there was a little bit of flim-flam happening there.
There was definitely a bit of flim-flam. And I'd like to say that I justified or made that decision based on the idea that it was close to the place closing and knew that we only had a limited amount of time to play, but that wasn't it. We should have holed out every hole, but we did not. I took advantage of the 6-stroke rule. I did.
Yes, immediately.
And now I feel bad about it.
Immediately. And it really was within 5 minutes of you saying we play out every hole.
How could you ever trust me again?
Well, I don't know. It's questionable. I mean, we were on the fence before, but now I just don't know. I don't know. And so I saw your decision-making there on the miniature golf course, and now I have to have a conversation with you about decision-making frameworks, and I don't know. It's questionable.
Yeah. So for those of you who are out there still listening after this stimulating intro to the conversation, I guess you'll have to make the judgment on whether or not I have proper decision-making frameworks or am even credible enough to talk about decision-making frameworks.
Well, we will leave what happened on that miniature golf course there in Orlando and move on to the conversation. So let's get to work with it, Mike. Decision-making frameworks.
Yeah. So think of every decision that we make. I mean, what are some of the things that get in the way of effective decision-making? Emotion, bias, inaccurate information, time. Like there's so many different things that impact our ability to make effective decisions. And one of the ways that we can help avoid some of those challenges is to have clear frameworks that we use to help make decisions. And one of the most common ones that's out there is the Franklin T. So you go through and Franklin T, and we'll include links to these and probably images in the show notes, but Franklin T, list of pros and cons for relative to making a given decision. Pros and cons. Should I order pizza tonight, or should I spend a lot of money and get involved in the invest in the stock market right now as things are going through a high level of volatility? There are pros and cons to each of these decisions. So one decision-making framework could be a Franklin T.
Okay. And Mike, do you usually use a framework when you have to make a decision?
It depends on the type of decision. Yeah, there are some decisions where, and Steve Anderson was on an episode and we talked about his book, The Bezos Letters, and we talk about level 1 and level 2 decisions. If it's a decision that's is really going to be hard to back out of at some point in time, it's hard to go back to the beginning, then it'll be a bit more direct or a bit more critical about how I do it. If it's something that is just a quick decision, yeah, I like to use kind of if this, then that type protocols where I say, if this happens, then I expect this to happen, or this could be an outcome. If this happens, this could be an outcome. If I go down this route, this could happen. So I'll use if this, then that type protocols to help inform decisions. I'll use the Franklin T to inform decisions. I'll even use a traditional 2x2, like an Eisenhower box. And the most common one on the Eisenhower box is focused on time management. How do we decide which things to focus time and attention on versus letting go? And ideally, we're spending more time working on the things that are not urgent, but important. And this is all stuff that we talk about in the Catalyst Sale course and in some of the work that I do with organizations. But these 2x2s can help us inform judgment on decisions that we want to make relative to investment of time or investment in sales marketing. The specific one I use there is determining whether or not on one axis I'll have problem, and that problem could either be known or unknown. And then on the other axis, I'll use solution, and that solution can either be known or unknown. And depending on if the problem is unknown or the solution is unknown, or if the problem is known and the solution is known, you can start to justify where do we need to invest further on things like marketing or sales or advertisement. So yes, I am constantly using decision-making frameworks to help support the decisions that I make. Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not as good as they could be.
Okay, so I'm going to return to the Franklin T, but before we got into that, I was just curious what if you used something like this. So the Franklin T, named after one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. Am I right?
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So it's pretty simple. It's just a T, cons on one side or for on one side, against on the other, however you want to look at it, pros and cons. And do you ever use this one, Mike, the Franklin T?
I do. And we use this in the context of, even Sean's going through this right now as we start to evaluate schools that he may want to go to after he graduates from Basha High School. So once he graduates from the high school, he goes off to college. Which school does he want to go to? Well, there are pros and cons to going to a school up in the Palouse and being at Washington State, or going out to Lawrence and being at Kansas, or staying out here and going to Arizona State University. So yeah, we'll use that. Not only will I use the Franklin T, we'll use that in the process as we evaluate schools, pros and cons of different schools. We'll also do it when we're going on vacation, pros and cons of going to Orlando versus going to Hawaii.
Or even the pros and cons of going to Orlando as everything's getting shut down.
Yeah. So that was an interesting challenge in decision making, right? You know, and as you know, family and I, we were planned to get on a cruise. We were going to go on a cruise right in the midst of all of this. So we're recording this on Wednesday, the 25th of March. So we're recording on Wednesday, the 25th of March. We had a trip to Orlando planned on Thursday, the 12th of March, and had planned on getting on a cruise on Sunday, the 15th of March. And if everybody goes back in their way back machine and looks at the data that was available at that point in time, you could say, well, why would you put your family on a flight to go to Orlando and potentially get on a cruise when there's a virus that is quickly moving around the world?
And what would your answer be to that?
Well, I can tell you what we did. We got on the airplane. But when we got on the airplane, we had a couple of things in place. We had some contingency plans in place. We knew that we had flights that could get us back to Phoenix on Sunday if we didn't get on the cruise ship. So we had an option. One option would be to get on an airplane and fly back. Another option would be to take the rental car and drive back. I don't care for driving. Even just driving from here, Arizona to California, drives me nuts. So if we were to increase that trip by 3 times and then have a bunch of people inside a car together, that would have been really frustrating. But as we went through the process of saying, does it make sense for us to get on this airplane? We were looking at total number of cases that were known in the state of Florida, total number of cases that were known in the state of Arizona, different restrictions that they were putting in place on travel. If we were comfortable enough getting on an airplane, what our personal risks were as far as health risks, age, any of those other demographics. We looked at each of those and said, you know what, right now, based on what we know, felt comfortable getting on an airplane sanitized everything, but felt comfortable getting on an airplane. And in hindsight, probably wasn't the best decision based on the way that things are moving along. But we made a decision with the information that we had, and justified at least starting the trip with some contingencies in place to get out of it.
Well, I like that you mentioned that. Based on the information you had, it was a good decision, or at least reasonable decision. But looking back, maybe it wasn't the best. But I think sometimes we get caught up in that. We look back and say, gosh, what was I thinking? That wasn't a great decision. But often, given where we were, what we were doing, the information we had, what looks like a bad decision now could have been a good decision when we made it.
It could have been. Yeah. So the Admiral Payne quote, I think, kind of comes into play here a bit. I'm going to stretch here a little bit because it's probably not the same instance, and that we weren't doing work or we weren't putting forth a given effort, but it's say, do your best and forgive yourself. And that's Priscilla Cockrell's father, if that's right.
That's right.
Is that correct? Yep. So we've talked about the quote before. When we had Dan on the podcast, we asked him what that meant to him, and we'll include a link to that episode. You make decisions based on the information you have. And in hindsight, did we take on unreasonable risk? Yeah, knowing what we know now, maybe we did. Had the information that we know now, would we still get on that airplane and go out? Would I fly out to Orlando Thursday, which is tomorrow, and come back on Sunday? Yeah, probably not. That would not be a good choice. There'd be way too much risk. I mean, there's the chance that air travel gets shut down sometime between now and then. Florida at this point in time, I think Orange County is under curfew of 11 o'clock and on lockdown as of midnight tonight. And again, all of this stuff, I know we're time dating it, but the key, and I think the direct nature of the questions that Jody's asking and the information, the transparency and the information that I'm sharing is sometimes you make the best decisions you can based on the information that's at play. And as much as these frameworks can help you avoid making an emotional decision, there's always outside influences that still play a part. Like in this instance, when we're going out to Florida, we've got a family that's looking forward to a vacation that we've got to pull the plug on. And again, hindsight being 2020, sometimes people get disappointed that you pull the plug on a vacation, and maybe that would have been the right thing to do. But given what we knew at the time, I was comfortable with making the decision primarily because I had the options in place where I knew we weren't going to get stuck.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now that we have a base in decision-making frameworks, you mentioned two, the Franklin T, the Eisenhower matrix. Maybe you want to mention more, but first, how do these help us in sales? How does using a framework help us as a sales professional?
There are many times, while sales is a very emotional role, there aren't a lot of pessimists that are good at sales. There aren't a lot of pessimists that get into sales. You have to have an optimistic view of the world. Now, you can be skeptical, but it's important to be optimistic because you're going to deal with the roller coasters of deals. And we talk about deals in the context from a sales process perspective. You've heard me talk about it in the context of chutes and ladders, that board game, or sometimes you go up a ladder and you're really excited about a deal that you're going to get done. And then all of a sudden you move 3 steps forward and you run into procurement, and now you're down a slide and you're right back at the beginning. So we deal with an emotional roller coaster in this role. We've also talked before about the idea of kind of staying flatline. Be like Eli Manning. Don't get too high, don't get too low. If we know that we're optimistic creatures in these roles and that emotion plays a part in decision-making and the amount of information that we share with others, decision-making frameworks can help remove that emotion and help us be more critical, take a more critical eye toward the information that we're sharing inside our organization and the way that we actually forecast.
And what is the alternative look like? If someone doesn't have a framework in place, what do the decisions look like? Or let me ask this in a different way. Can you usually tell yourself if somebody makes decisions based on a framework, or you said sales is emotional, that they're just going along with how they feel or whatever comes up?
Yeah, I mean, the data plays out over time. Many of us have had folks on our team who, and I've been labeled as this before, as a sandbagger, where you don't put things in the CRM until the deals are really close. So in that model, what I'm doing is not I've made my own decision that was based on a framework that I've adopted that's not necessarily the one the organization adopted. And I've been putting the organization in an awkward position that they can't accurately forecast. So if, let's say that I don't have a framework that I'm using or a model that I'm testing ideas and concepts against or validating decisions against, I could get into a situation where I'm continuing to push deals out. And again, this is getting very sales specific. Folks will forecast, they'll put information in their CRM. They'll say that these deals are going to close by the end of the quarter. And then inevitably those deals get pushed out because they don't close by the end of the quarter and at the end of the next quarter, or they end up at the end of the end of the year. So you start to see all these deals pushed out with close dates that are on the last day of a fiscal quarter or a calendar quarter or a calendar year or a fiscal year. That to me is an indicator that maybe we don't really understand completely what's happening inside that deal. And we're making a decision to put a date based on either inaccurate information, a lack of a framework, or just because we're optimistic that we think things might happen and there's some magic that's going to happen between now and the end of the next quarter. And it could happen, but could is not really good for forecasting.
So if we've never used a framework in sales before, how do we get started? Where can we find frameworks? How do we know which one's best for us? And what advice do you have for implementing this for the first time?
I think you go out there and test things, kind of figure it out. Take some design principles and apply it to your business and say, what are some common things that we see in the business and common patterns that we see in the business, and how can we use those to evaluate data or evaluate decisions that we're making to better inform the business. Use things like the Eisenhower box or the Franklin T. Franklin T could be just help inform decisions on whether or not you make investment in a given product, or whether or not you make a hire for a given role, or whether or not you invest in adding headcount into that area of the business. There are multiple frameworks that are out there. The ones that we use at Catalyst Sale include the Franklin T. They include the Eisenhower box, both for time and for understanding sales and marketing mix and investment. Another one, and I don't know that we'd really it's hard to call this a decision-making framework. It's more of a model that we could use to say, are things moving the direction that we want them to? But we use the sales process, the Catalyst sale process, which is validation, qualification, fit, feasibility, proposal, closed won, confirmation. And as we go through gates that we can answer yes or no to, as we go through gates, we determine, are we actually making progress toward getting that deal done? And do we feel confident in our forecast? So use these models, use these frameworks in your business to help inform decision-making, inform investment, and accurately assess the business in a way that doesn't allow too much emotion to play. And we'll include links inside the show notes on this episode to a couple of the ones that we use. We've named a number of other ones. I'd be really interested in hearing what are some other frameworks, decision-making frameworks or models that you use out in your business.
And did you happen to use a decision-making framework that day we played miniature golf?
Jody, how long are we going to talk about the miniature golf? Are we just going to keep talking about this in every episode between now and when we play again? And if we're all under quarantine for this period of time that people are talking about, these episodes could get really boring.
Well, I think maybe when it's time, we can just live stream our rematch.
Oh, absolutely. You were out there live. You were doing, what were you doing? This shows you how in touch I am with social, but you were doing Instagram stories of the match.
Yeah, I was nice though. I just did one before, one during, and one after. So it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad.
Until next time, my friend.
Until next time. Well, feel free and please do reach out and let Mike know what decision-making frameworks you use, whether it's one we mentioned or one you want to introduce us to. And Mike, how can they get in touch?
Best way, go to catalystsale.com and just share information in the live chat. It just drops right into our Slack instance. That's the best way. If you want to do it more publicly though, social at Catalyst Sale on Twitter, and you can find us at Catalyst Sale on LinkedIn as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast.